All right, welcome for another episode of Mental Health Mondays. I am AA Ron, aka Mind Runner, and my guest at this time, he is a do-it-yourself musician who has made custom interest musics from MMA fighters all the way to AEW wrestlers. He is also the host of the Be Kind Rewind Twitch podcast. He is a veteran of Rocket League and Fortnite. His debut album, Bring the Ruckus, had over 12 zillion downloads. His debut video, Post Down, was filmed on the Hardy compound in North Carolina. He is the remote part of monster mixes and music. Hater hits hard, Mikey Rukus. I don't have the girls with the brooms though. I'm sorry.
I should have got the brooms out.
Mikey, thank you so much for joining me on Mental Health Mondays. I'm a huge fan. There's so many fans out there that really, and I've been pumping the Jamie Hayter mix, I think, on a daily basis. It's almost like my get pumped for the morning jam. And I really appreciate you being here. I definitely want to get into the specifics about with regards to ADHD. I've learned a lot just doing this podcast. But first, I want to ask you: has music been a part of your life forever, or when did you start really getting into music?
Hey man, thanks for having me on. This is actually the first time I've ever spoken publicly in like an interview setting to talk about ADHD, living with ADHD, working with ADHD, battling and actually fortifying it and using it as a weapon. So I appreciate you allowing me to come on and talk about that. So for sure. And music has been around for me since 1989. My very first concert, Metallica and Justice for All, the And Justice for All tour, Richmond Coliseum. I was 13 years old. My sister told my mom that she was taking me to a bluegrass concert, and I was supposed to be going horseback riding. And she said, "Put your Ride the Lightning shirt on." And I was like, "Okay." So we end up at the Richmond Coliseum, standing in line. I haven't put two and two together at all, and I see a lot of headbangers around, and I'm like, so. There's a lot of headbangers at this bluegrass show. So she puts the ticket in my hand. She's like, "Do not lose it." So I didn't even look at it. I was like, okay. She's like, "Well, look at your ticket." And it was Metallica with the Cult opening. And this is when Matt Sorum was actually playing drums for the Cult before he joined Guns N' Roses. And I was absolutely blown away by the show. Complete and utter mayhem from start to finish. I actually got to meet the Cult that night. I met Matt Sorum that night. Really? My very first live rock concert, and I met them, and they said, "Man, you're spoiled. You're going to be spoiled for the rest of your life because you're not going to get to meet everybody every single time." But and my sister was like, "Yeah, it's my little brother, man. He wants to play guitar, man." And and they kind of, that whole entire experience and those guys telling me, "Hey, if you want to do it, just go for it," and that birthed everything. And ever since then, 13 years old. And I dabbled in it in high school. I got away from it a little bit outside of high school just because I went directly into the workforce, got married very young, started having a lot of kids. I had 6 children by the time I was 26 years old. So, the actual production side of it kind of took a back seat. The dream was always there. I was always dabbling in it and kind of hoping for a big break, but didn't really understand what my lane was. And then in 2010, out of the necessity of supplemental income, I just decided I'm going to make theme music. I want to be able to do different styles of music. I don't want to be pigeonholed into one genre. And but the pro wrestling space at the time was already sewn up. Like, it was Jim Johnston, CFOs was actually coming on, and the indie scene wasn't what it is today. It wasn't that in 2010. And I was heavily into mixed martial arts. So I just started in MMA, creating music for independent and regional amateur fighters up and down the East Coast. and just networked and it continued to snowball. So a year after I started, my music was being played in the UFC. And then that kind of compounded into working on theme music for World Series of Fighting on NBC Sports. And then it was the actual theme song for NBC Sports. And I helped launch the audio brand for the Invicta Fighting Championships, the all-women fight league that's still going today. And then in 2016, as that market started to kind of dry up a little bit, I noticed how big the independent wrestling scene was. And I just basically started over again. And between 2016 and 2019, I created close to 300 themes for wrestlers in and around the U.S. and the U.K. and Germany. And then in 2019, AEW was founded, and I kind of felt it inside that the gig was mine. And mind you, I was still working in retail full time the entire time. So I was able to make that transition away from retail in mid 2019 to join AEW full time, and it's been lightning speed ever since.
Awesome. How did it feel to probably regrettably tell your boss that peace out, it's been real, but heading to AEW full time?
Dude, let me tell you, 25 plus years in retail, there were days where I was just like, I really hope that I'm working towards something bigger, because I can't do this forever. Like, my body was physically starting to break down, and you know, there was a lot that was happening at the very, very end of it. So like, the transition couldn't have happened at a better time. So, but when that call came in and the decision that my wife and I made that I was going to leave retail and do this, I didn't just put in a 2-week notice. I stayed on. So I joined AEW May the 1st of 2019 officially. I'd signed my contract in April of 2019. My official start date was May 1st, but I didn't leave my retail setting until August of that year. So we had a lot of things in place. There were people that I was helping to get promoted. There was other people that I was helping to get transferred and things like that. So I didn't want to leave any stones unturned, and I didn't want to leave anybody hanging. I stayed on and did both until it was time for TV, you know, for Dynamite to launch. So, you know, they had a 3-month notice. I gave them a 90-day notice that I'd be out there.
That's a testament to your character, though. You know, I mean, that's, you don't leave them hanging. You don't just like, I'm out of here, see you later. That shows that you truly care. And that's got to be surreal. And it's interesting too. What did you keep telling yourself, or did Mrs. Rukus keep you motivated? Because it could get, I know that a lot of times, a lot of creators, they get bummed out if they're constantly doing the grind and nothing's panning out. Sometimes they have no idea what's right around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been an absolute blessing to have my wife there, and she's always been kind of the driving force. And it's, for me, when you're in the middle of it, especially with, you know, the ADHD and attention deficit, I can multitask, and I was loving it. But at the same time, when you're in the midst of working 60 hours running a retail store, and then working and taking on different independent projects, and then you're scoring films, and then you're dealing with life stuff. You've got kids that are graduating from high school, and you've got others that are coming up from middle school into high school, and you've got in-laws that are moving in and things like that. You don't realize that you're burning yourself out in the process. Yeah. A lot of times you don't realize until it's too late. So I had reached right towards the end, in like maybe December of 2018. I started to kind of rationalize just giving the music up altogether. And this is after, you know, 8 years of really like nose to the grind, independent, like freelancing nonstop. And I had a queue of people, you know, that I had a queue of clients that I would work down and always be looking ahead. I almost walked away from all of it. And luckily, Mrs. Rukus was there to kind of like give me a little bit of shaking baby and say, hey, like, there's a bigger cause that you're working towards. You got to stay with it. You can't. And she just said, you know, if you give this up, you'll never be at peace ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, there's like, with artists like yourself, I think there's like a calling. It's like you're being compelled. Like you got to be involved in something that involves like your creativity. And it's amazing that you the multitasking thing. Is that a product of your ADHD, or is there? Because I've heard in some cases there's that hyper focus where you focus on just one task, and that it's like the house can be on fire, but you're still cutting that track. How does that manifest itself with you?
Yeah, so it manifests in very different ways. There's some days where I can manage multiple things. There's some days where I'm hyper focused on one thing, and the funny thing about hyper focus is that everything else around you just becomes a blur, and that's the only way that I can explain it. It's like a blur, like time stops when you're in the midst of working on this particular thing. And then when you kind of come out of it, it's like 5 hours have gone by, and it literally feels like you've just time traveled, because it doesn't feel like a 5 hour process. It feels like you're in the midst of these things. So the manifestation of it is different on different days. And there's times where I can't even complete a thought. And I have days where you struggle to concentrate. You struggle to stay motivated. You struggle to like comprehension, whether it's the comprehension and perception of time, or the perception of just stringing things together. And I tell my wife every now and then, like, my brain has a tendency to shut down mid-sentence, and then I can't finish what I'm saying. So I'm just like, ADHD. Like, and that's really, and that is something that I've dealt with since childhood, and didn't know that it was a thing until one of my children was diagnosed with it, and I'm in the room with him, and the doctor looks at me and says, have you ever been like clinically diagnosed? I was like, no. He's like, you exhibit everything that he's experienced. Like, I can just see how you're sitting in the chair. I can see different things in your movements, your eyes, and all of these different things. And he says, and this wasn't just a one sitting, this was over a period of time. And I realized then, it was like probably my early 30s, that it's like, okay, I have it. I didn't realize it. I was never on medication. I was not one to vocalize as a kid that I had these issues. A lot of times I would just shut down and recluse. And then other times it would act out in tapping and being extra fidgety. And I can remember teachers calling my mom, and my Spanish teacher in particular. Senor Miguel is always tapping on the desk, and he's not paying attention. And every time I say something, he's like, it's big deal. And she's like, I don't know what to tell you. He's been tapping since he was like 5 years old. And, but my tapping was way over the top. It wasn't just like a single, tapping. Like I'm hitting beats and I'm hitting my elbows and just, and
you're
just
Neil Peart
zoned out
in the middle of a Rush concert, right?
So, I mean, it's different. Every single day is different. And I had to kind of develop my own self-coping mechanisms, and not even recognizing them as being self-coping mechanisms until after the fact.
What are some of those self-coping mechanisms that you deploy when you're feeling a certain way?
Well, when I was younger, there was a lot of different things that I would do. Like, baseball was my number one when I was a teenager. And, my parents had split when I was in the 9th grade. I was right in my teenage formative years. My dad wasn't in the picture. My mom was working 3 jobs to support me and my younger brother, my younger sister. My older sister had already moved out, and she was on doing her own thing. So I was kind of I had experienced all of those emotions, but then I had shut everything off on the outside world. And a lot of times when it came time to actually concentrate, the only thing that would bring me to a center was hearing my baseball coach and hearing his voice. So as I got a little bit older, if I was having a really bad day, I would just go to the batting cage and I'd take 200 swings. And every time I would swing, I would hear my coach: plant your foot, adjust your hip, adjust your wrist, and these are the things that I would listen to over and over again. And that was just kind of my thing. Art, painting, and drawing. I wasn't very good at drawing. I loved painting, oil paints. I would just start with an empty canvas and just do whatever, just make up scenery, kind of like a Bob Ross type, scenery.
Happy trees.
Deal. Yeah. And that would help. But baseball was always the main thing. Music was for a time, and then when I started producing, music became like a job. So I actually detached from it for a long time and had to kind of rediscover my way into being motivated, because there's a difference between creating for the art, creating for monetary purposes, and creating to tell stories. And you have to be careful not to lose yourself in one of those things, because if you lose yourself in just making money, the storytelling aspect will suffer. If you lose yourself in, I'm going to do it for the art, then you don't pay attention to where you can actually maximize and monetize that. So there's a lot of different things that play into it. Music used to be a center, and then it ended up not being for a long time. And it was me actually working full time for AEW that I rediscovered how to put myself in a position where it was my center.
Cool.
And it's really kind of hard to put into words with that, but I think setting goals and setting an end date or an end, like, you have to have an end thing. You have to work towards something, because if you work and just work, you lose interest really fast. So it's never been a thing where I just strum. It's never been a thing where I practice. It's always been, I have to get this done. Yeah. And that has kind of helped also in the focus aspect, because once it's done, it's like that sense of achievement, no matter how big or how small, that kind of drives you from point A to point B, as opposed to losing your way, trying to grasp at all the different shiny things.
Yeah, I get it. I think a lot of people can relate. I know that with me, I've written my best term papers last minute, or I've written my, or I've done my things where I've had to focus, and I had to actually get the thing done. I had a timetable. It's like, it's due tomorrow. Well, all of a sudden it's like, it's done. Do you ever feel like that, especially with AEW? Because sometimes they might like hit you up on the phone like, hey, we got this new wrestler debuting tomorrow. We just signed him today. He needs a ska themed song, but it also needs to have a dubstep mix to it. Because I've read on Twitter sometimes where you're like, hey, I'm getting this music done in 3 hours. Let's go.
Yeah, it has happened more times than not. And you learn that aspect of live TV. So what that comes down to is decision making.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that people struggle with within ADHD is deciding where to go. Mm-hmm. I usually tell people, for me, it's like ADHD is seeing all of these different pieces to the puzzle. Mm-hmm. And as you're reaching for one piece of the puzzle, in the midst of it, you see another piece, and then you go to reach for that piece. And then as you're reaching, you see another piece. So it's like that in terms of your decision-making process. When you're in a crunch and you're in a time frame and the stakes are high, you can't second guess. You just have to make a decision and do it. You make a decision and do it. I'm going to choose these kicks. I'm going to choose these snares. I'm going to write this synth line. I'm going to hit this bass line. I'm going to mix it this way. And then you eliminate all, and it doesn't happen overnight. You have to this is like repetition over and over again. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't second guess yourself. Yeah. If you second guess yourself, it's like getting a flat tire and not being able to change it. So you have to, analogy. Yeah, you have to kind of make those decisions, get to the other side, then go back and review and say, okay, what could I have done differently? What can I tweak here? You can always open up the session and then tweak it afterwards. But for those things to get done, like, it has to be boom, 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 boom. Like, these are the decisions I'm going to make. And a lot of times mentally, I'll be making those decisions before I even walk into the office. So a prime example was when we had our Halloween show and the Elite came out to the Ghostbusters style Bud's theme. We had already had something in place. 5:30 that night before TV, we had to make the change. And Kenny had called me and said, we're so depressed. We have to change this. Can you do this? And I'm at an auto shop picking my car up because the brakes had gone on it. So picked the car up. As I'm leaving, he's texting me. I said, I got you. I'm already working it out in my head. Got caught in traffic, Traffic was really bad. It took me like 40 minutes to get home and jump in. And I let my wife know on the way. I'm like, look, I got to get in the office. We have to make a change. So, and I went to it. And even with my computer, I had run an update earlier that day, and there was a plug-in that froze my whole system up. And, didn't panic, just rebooted, had to go back and lost like 30 minutes worth of my work and just said, okay, if I repeat what I just did, that's fine. If something is different, whatever, we just have to get it done. So I delivered it to Kenny at 8:01. He texted back that he loved me, and he's like, you're a genius. And I get the prayer emojis, and I send it to the truck at 8:03, so, and it comes down to decision making. And that, I guess that's part of the hyper focus.
Yeah.
Just being able to get into a zone where it's like, you just can't stop. And it's one thing after the next. And it's an amazing feeling. You don't even think about it when it's happening. It's like everything is numb. And when it's done, it's done. And you look back and it's like, how did I do this? And there's with the hater rave that we just did, like that was 4 months worth of chipping away at it. But even still, there were times where I felt like I'm in over my head.
Yeah.
And what am I doing? And I said to myself, I got to put an end date on this. I have to put an end date on it. I have to close it out. I got to stop listening to it. And even now when I listen to it, there's things I was like, I would have done that different. I would have done that. But if I had obsessed over that before the project was done, we still wouldn't have one. So.
Yep, exactly. It'd be 2 years later, you'd still have most. Maybe I should put this here, put that. Yeah. It's almost, and it's what you said there too about having a goal. It seems to be, it's like that makes it do or die. You've got to get it done. You've got to fish or cut bait. You got to, and it's great. It's great to hear that you have that mentality where you can just take the emotions and everything to the side. Because if you panic now, you know that panic is going to ruin everything. It's going to make it even worse. And you just put it to the side, and then you say, I'll deal with that later. I'll have the heart attack after I'm done. It's kind of like, and I can sympathize. I think everybody can sympathize with the Windows update, right? When you're trying to get that last little thing, and all of a sudden, ding, 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 ding. Oh, no.
Yeah.
But that's.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
no, go ahead.
The funny thing is that a lot of times what will happen is in the midst of the decision making, you start thinking about the art aspect or the money aspect. And like I was talking about before, you can actually take the best parts of those different things and meld them into one thing, one focus. So you're focused on the art, you're focused on the storytelling, you're focused on the monetization part on the back end, but it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So it's just a lot of repetition. It's a lot of when you feel like it can't be done. And now, granted, not everybody's going to be pressed with a 3-hour deadline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the real sense of terms, like you have daily goals, you have weekly goals, and sometimes you sit and there's nothing happening. There's a struggle. So it's okay to take 30 minutes and just go do something completely different and come back with a fresh set of ears, a fresh mindset, something to reset. It's really hard sometimes to battle through. You just have to know, you have to listen to your body for those signals. Sometimes you can battle through, sometimes you can push through, sometimes you just have to stop. And I would never advise somebody to stop and then miss a deadline. But at the same time, you have to take a mental break in order for you to reset and continue.
Do you feel like the brain is kind of like any muscle? Like if you're in the, you don't keep working your chest muscles every day in the gym. You got to have that's why there's chest day, leg day. Do you think it's like the same with your brain? Sometimes you got to take care of that brain. You got to let that brain heal, if you will. I mean,
absolutely.
Lack of a better term.
Whether it's a hobby that you're into, whether it's a video game that you like to play, as long as it doesn't overtake your main thing that you have to do, that you're responsible for, I think it's extremely healthy and it's necessary. So, I'm not an avid video game player outside of what we do with the show on Thursdays and Sundays. I don't have that time. But there are times where I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to talk about nothing. I don't want to listen to anything. I'm not going to listen to any music. I'm going to play Rocket League, and I'll play like 1 round or 2 rounds, and then I'm back to doing what I'm doing. That's like 15, 20 minutes. You know what I mean? So it's always good to take that break and just do something else and then come back. You'll be a lot more productive coming back than you would be trying to power through.
I get it. How did that manifest? Others see you in school when you were growing up? Because I'm an elementary school teacher, and I've noticed I've had kids that were later diagnosed with ADHD, but I had this presumption that ADHD is just when kids are bouncing in their seats. But I mean, every kid's going to be bouncing in their seats if they're having to sit there for 8 hours a day. But like my students that really had severe ADHD, it was the opposite. I had one girl that we actually had to physically go and shake her to tell her we're going to lunch because she's reading a book like this. And then I had another student that when you would ask him a question, he would freeze up and kind of do this. And a lot of people thought there was some other issue with him. But what it is when you ask him a question, when you ask other people a question, it's like you're talking about the analogy with the puzzle pieces. Other people would see 3 or 4 puzzle pieces. He would see like 80. And he just would sit there and just be like thinking like this. And I didn't realize that was it until later on learning more about ADHD. Yeah. How did, and we've come a long way in society now talking about mental health. That's one of the reasons I created this podcast is today mental health is something that when you and I were kids, it wasn't talked about as much. Would you agree? How did most teachers, parents, other kids, other people react to you not even knowing that you had ADHD? Did they treat you differently? Did they think that, oh, you're just a hyper kid or you're a lazy kid? Or did they put any pejoratives on that?
So it's funny because I was an introvert in school. I was a major introvert. I it wasn't until my senior year when I started to kind of project my personality. For me, I wasn't the bounce off the walls kind of a kid.
Yeah.
I would shut down. Sometimes I would go multiple periods in school and not say a word. I could hear all these different things happening inside my head, but I wouldn't vocalize it. A lot of times I would shut down. People didn't really see me as the hyper kid. It wasn't really in me. I would get fidgety and like tapping and stuff like that. That didn't come till maybe 16, 17 years old is when that started to really kind of come into play. But other than that, like it was always a recluse type thing and a shutdown type thing for me. And it wasn't like, so nobody knew. I didn't know. I don't think my mom knew, because it wasn't like I bounced around at home either. I was just kind of like, I was off in my own world, kind of doing my own thing. I had a fairly normal upbringing, and I had a group of friends, grew up in a decent neighborhood. My younger sister was like the baby girl. So she was always trying to, she was always, on my mom's case to provide her with, I want this, mom, I want that. And then my brother was the baby, and he was always, So seeing my mom do everything she could to take care of us, I didn't want to be any more of a burden on her. So I shut all that out. I didn't ask for a lot. When I was able to start working, I just went and got a job. My first job was I worked at the convenience store in my neighborhood. I learned how to cut meat at 13 years old. I was a butcher. And I did that on and off until I graduated, and I went from 20 hours a week to 60 hours a week working in this butcher shop. Did that and continued my retail career. But it was never a situation where I threw myself out in front of people for whether it was for attention or whether it was just absolute hyperactivity. I just wasn't that kid. Yeah. I could feel it inside of me, and I could see it, and I could hear it inside my internal, being, but I never really vocalized it outward. So nobody really knew. Nobody would know how to address it or anything like that. And it wasn't until later on when I had my own kids that I was told that, hey, you live with this, and I could see, and kudos to you for developing some self-coping mechanisms, because a lot of people don't do that.
So basically, on Saturdays when kids would go out and play, you were up in your room, let the stereo blaze.
Yeah, that was, I did my Saturday thing. I hung out with my friends, but I had my time where the music was playing, and I wasn't big for going out at night.
Mm-hmm.
I was not like the party guy or anything like that. I really wasn't at all. I was a recluse. So
yeah, Kitty Fantastic. I had her on a few weeks ago. She does ADHD videos on her Instagram, and she mentioned she talked to me about the ADHD paralysis, where it looks like someone's just like this, but what's going on in their head is like this Christian, like this whole thing of everybody talk about like different voices going on and all these different thoughts, but out on the outside, it just looks like they're just comatose.
Yeah, they have, and there was a very interesting meme that I saw. I want to say maybe 5-6 months ago, where it's like water with a little ice cap. It looked like an iceberg, but underneath it was like what people see on the outside, and then underneath it was this giant. It was the giant ice, the ice base, and it was like anxiety, fear, self-doubt, and all these different things. And that's what encompasses kind of ADHD and how I experience it, because it's never really been an outward sort of a thing. It's always been an internal thing. So, but in the same, you still have to figure out how to go through life with it. And some people need medication. I've never been against it. There's some people that I think that need it and benefit from it. I never had it, and it was never a thing where I thought it was something that I would need. And by the time I was diagnosed with it, the doctor had said, like, look, you seem to be doing okay with this, so we'll leave it at that. And then even still, as I started to recognize different patterns and different behaviors, and some days I'd wake up and I could feel it when I wake up. It's like, I'm not going to have a good day today.
Yeah.
So it's like, I need to get through this day, and I'll be good. And there's other days where I feel like I can conquer everything, you know what I mean? And I can see all of the different things that have to be accomplished, and how and lists are always good. Making a list, making a to-do list, so you don't allow yourself to get off track.
Yeah.
Goal setting is a big thing for me. Taking a break when necessary. These are all those different things that really helped in my trek, I guess.
My trek, yes. Did it feel was there a big aha moment when the doctor turned to you and said, "Hey, you're ADHD," or was it just kind of like, "Oh, okay," and then you started to recognize patterns?
It didn't really, I didn't think too much of it. My main focus at that time was my kids. I have 8 total. I have 6 boys. I have 2 girls. Two of my boys are stepsons. So we have blended families. My third son experienced a lot of emotional issues from very early age, and he still has them today. And and he deals with them the best that he can. But my main focus was on them. So when the doctor had kind of told me about it, I didn't think too much of it, but it was after that I started recognizing, like, why can't there's days where I would try to talk, and it's like, why can't I can't even finish my thought. Like, what is that? And then I would kind of draw back to that. And then I would go and just watch my son and how he interacts, and start to kind of put the pieces together over time. And, that's kind of where I ended up.
So it sounds like you've been helpful with your son in managing it by your own activities that you used to manage.
Yeah, and we always try to. He has, and I don't want to get too deep into his stuff, but he's got more than just ADHD. He had they called it opposition defiant disorder, which is and I had never heard of that until until him. It's like when authority tells you to do this, it's in your makeup to do the exact opposite. You know, he had a very slight Tourette's, and he had some mood disorders and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And it's something that he's battled for a long time. And, you know, we tried different medicines and they would cause an increase in like his tics. Sometimes it would cause him to be aggressive, you know, so we kind of had to work things out over time. And he's an adult now, and he's working hard, and he's been through a lot. It's been a tough road for him. And, but it's some of it by his own hand,
Yeah.
some of his, some rough decisions that we made there, but he focuses on trying to thrive, and he's not always successful with it, but it's something that I see that he's making the effort. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
some people have it better than others, and some people work harder than others, and some people just struggle, you know, and you know, all my love to him. He's a good guy. He's a good guy at the end of the day. And you know, he's got good things ahead for him.
It sounds like he's got great parents. You know, if Mrs. Rukus is as supportive of you, it sounds like, yeah, he's got a great mom there as well. And you mentioned that your folks split up in ninth grade. Very similar. Mine was eighth grade, and so it was kind of that whoa kind of feeling. But the interesting thing is, how did your stepchildren like bond with you when you got married? Was it kind of was there a like get to know you process, or was it really quick? Or and do they see you as dad? I mean, how does that relationship work?
Yeah, it was a long process. So, you know, my kids were raised a certain way. They were raised a certain way. There was two completely different households, and when you bring them together, you know, the majority of the issues will stem from parenting differences. And so Mrs. Ruckus and I struggled with that for a long time. Our relationship was great, but how we parented was different. And my stepson, my older stepson, wasn't ADHD, but he is like major OCD. And so that it was a whole entire thing within itself, like next level OCD. And it took time. It took time to figure out what the happy medium was. And then, you know, as they got older, it became a thing where, you know, we all bonded. You know, my third son, I would say, is one of the closest ones to Mrs. Ruckus, his stepmom, and her oldest son is fairly close to me now. Like we go to concerts and stuff, and we talk about music and everything like that, and we bond over Star Set, you know.
Have you had an Injustice for All moment for them, where like, hey, we're gonna go horseback riding, and
we actually, Mrs. Ruckus and I actually took them all to see Breaking Benjamin one night. So
awesome,
and they were completely blown away. And Breaking Benjamin was amazing. And it just so happened that the lead singer from Starset showed up that night, and they were like, "Oh my god!" So, yeah, it's good. It's and those things again, those are going to be lifelong processes. You just have to find the happy medium and have common ground and always communicate.
Yeah, communication, and not just, I think, especially with relationships, but in general. And I feel like, you know, our society, we need to do a lot more of that. Would you agree that like you get more out of talking and getting to know people rather than just being stuck in your own echo chamber?
Absolutely, and I wish that I had that trait and that quality when I was younger, because it probably would have helped a lot sooner. And communication is always going to be key. And you know, we're in a society now where everything is closed off. Everything is on the phone. Everything is on an iPad or on a computer. And you know, you have people develop a distorted sense of what reality is, and you have to venture outside of that and have human interconnection and contact, and you know, for it to be effective.
It's vital. And I think I've seen that, you know, today's generation of kids, they're pretty much being raised, you know, they can type great like this, but they're almost like they're having trouble, like that line between online and reality is starting to get really blurred. And I know you're actually now congratulations, you're a grandfather, right? Congratulations.
7 times over. I got
7 times over. Awesome. Well, you look great for a grandpa, for Grandpa Rukus. It's awesome. How do you notice anything like that with your grandkids, and like what kind of restrictions do they have with regards to social media, or is it kind of like, is it more about communication with them as well?
So all of my grandbabies are extremely young. My oldest granddaughter is 7 years old. My oldest son has 4. He has 4 of the 7, and he and his wife are amazing parents. They're firm, but they're fair, and they have limitations, and they're extremely involved in everything that they do. And just seeing how my oldest one, I say that he's the most sensible out of the entire group, because especially with mine, my kids are a feral bunch. Like that's a light way to put it. Like, they're a feral bunch, and
they're a ruckus.
They raised their ruckus throughout the town of Hopewell, Virginia over the years. And, even now, my younger brother is a teacher at one of the elementary schools. Oh, you're Rivera. You're Rivera. You're Rivera. So, but yeah, my oldest son has a great head on his shoulders. He and his wife, high school sweethearts. They are a perfect match for each other, and they really devote themselves to raising their children. So with them being the older ones in the group, they're very straightforward with them. They have their playtime, but then they have their work time, and they have their activities, and then they have their rest periods, So I don't get in the middle of how any of them parent. Mm-hmm. I always kind of just sit back and watch. The rest of them are all babies. But if they ever come to me, or they ever need to come to Mrs. Rukus, we're always here. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I've never been one to overstep. I just kind of have to let, and I like being pop, where I show up, I give out toys, and I get to play, and then I get to leave,
Oh, have fun, everybody.
Yeah. So I had my time raising kids. I'm not doing that again. So.
Well, that's what grandparents are all about. See, that you go through all the struggles of being a parent, but when you get to be grandpa, then you get to spoil them rotten and then just leave. It's like, well, y'all have fun. We'll see you later.
Oh, and when they act out, and I see them getting all upset and everything, and I laugh at them for getting in trouble, and then I laugh at the parents, because now they know what I had to deal with.
That sounds familiar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I wonder where they got that from. Exactly. Well, Mikey, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for hanging and talking. I'd love to talk for another hour, but I'd love to have you come back and talk more about ADHD. And
for sure.
And talk more about other stuff too. I'd love to promote. I mean, the Be Kind Rewind, it's on Twitch, and you guys also tweet out a lot of stuff. It takes me back, because I'm a child of the 80s myself. And in fact, one of the things I work on with my podcast is I try not to talk over my guests, and so I have a little note to myself that says, "Shut up, Mr. Burden," and that's from Big Trouble in Little China, if you remember.
Yeah.
So I have that to remind myself there, but I love just kind of going back into the 80s. I'm a little biased. I feel like the 80s and 90s had better music than today. Not saying that your music, today, I'm sure it's influenced, but I really enjoy going through that. What inspired Be Kind Rewind, and what got you excited about doing that?
So again, this is one of those things that's an escape for me. Mm-hmm. My co-host, Will, keeping it Will, he and I have been friends for a very long time. He was the best man at mine and Mrs. Rukus's wedding. Awesome. He used to run a couple of bars here in the area, and I met him through playing in a band that would gig in these bars, and we just became friends. He's a huge wrestling fan. And he had been trying to get me to start a podcast for a long time. And I wouldn't do it. And I was like, and the last thing I want to do is talk about wrestling. Like especially nowadays, like, And I know that a lot of other wrestlers feel that same way. Like they eat, sleep, and breathe wrestling. Sometimes they just want to talk about something else. Sometimes they just want to do something else. So that kind of birthed the whole thing with Be Kind and Rewind. My favorite retail job of all time. I was a multi-unit manager for Blockbuster, and I absolutely loved waking up every morning, going into my stores, and just talking about movies and games all day long. And I woke up one day and I was like, look, if we're going to do this, I want it to be a nostalgia-based show. We talk about 80s and 90s, movies and games, toys, pop culture, all that kind of stuff. And he was like, I love it. And then I just came up with the idea of the table reads, the wacky table reads. It's like, look, let's bring the wrestlers on in a non-wrestling format. Let's talk about movies. Let's talk about their favorite movies. And we'll do a scene read and just have fun with it. So that's kind of how the whole thing came about. It was literally, we were just kind of shooting some ideas back and forth. And he was like, oh my God, this is great. Let's do it.
Oh, it's tremendous. The one you had with Effie recently had me in tears.
Effie's amazing.
Yeah, that was tremendous. If you haven't checked it out, please check out Be Kind Rewind. On Twitch. You will not be disappointed. It's hilarious. I'm an 80s baby too. I remember when I remember the transition of Blockbuster going from VHS to mostly DVDs, and it was like, but still, it was you have this wall of a new release. But then, first thing I would do whenever we go in is forget about going to the wall. We'd always check the desk to see what just got dropped off and hadn't been put back up yet. We'd sit there and go through all those.
And it's crazy because I was with Blockbuster in 2007, 2008, 2009-ish. And when my stores closed, they weren't broken. Like, I had stores that were doing over $1 million a year. Mm-hmm. And my home store was right up next to Fort Lee. And Fort Lee is the one Army base where everybody has to pass through it. Yeah. And we would have instructors come over from Germany, spend time in Fort Lee, come in and buy just loads of DVDs because they didn't have those in Germany. So they just take them back. Yeah. We had, and like Friday nights were popping off in there. Like we would be at capacity. I would have my employees were popping popcorn and doing trivia for people who were in the line and giving away prizes and stuff like that. And so like I would have the regional people come into my store on a Friday night and see this place, was jumping, and they were like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And, things like that, where I know I can look back on and that was a happy time, being able to apply that now in this format and just give myself an escape for a couple of hours. Yeah. To not talk about wrestling, not worry about the wrestling music, not worry about anything that's happening in the world today, and just like talk about a time that was fun, and keep it lighthearted. So that's kind of been the thing. And, we've developed a very cool community within ourselves. It's growing little by little, and hopefully one day we'll have a giant community, and it's cool to see something like that from the very beginning begin to start to grow, and we have our regulars and stuff like that.
It's a great hang. I wish I was able to hang more, but I try to catch you. I have you guys on my my notifications, but sometimes I'm not able to go in there. But if you get a chance to hang, if you're an 80s or 90s baby, or even if you're if you want to it's a great hang. You guys are really funny. I have a question for you though. Sure. Do you truly believe that Peter Cullen is the best voice actor of all time?
1,000%. 1,000%. Now, that's not to say we haven't had great voice actors over the years. Yes. Mel Blanc is one. Yes. Frank Welker is the perfect opposite to Peter Cullen. But when you think about the one singular voice throughout the generations that has really in Optimus Prime, like that Autobots one voice. Yes. I mean, that's just the voice. And that's the voice when you're a kid, you sit up straight. When you hear that voice and you're a teenager, you sit up straight. And when you're a grown up and you hear that voice, you feel like you can run through a wall. You know what I mean? And it's like, and that was one man over all of those iterations. And I'm sure that, they've had different people voice Optimus Prime in different animated series, but to me, there's one. And his voice is definitive amongst any of the others. And I know I got some I had some people wanting to debate. Like, to me, there's no debate.
No.
None.
Well, he was also Batman in the animated series. He was Batman in the animated series and Optimus Prime. It's like, what's your argument's invalid at this point if you can argue against that. I have to agree. I mean, he's got that commanding voice. If you want to have that commanding leader, and I'm so glad they included his voice in the movies. You know, say what you want about The Last Night or which, you know, we could argue which
Transformers act like that movie never happened.
What? Yeah. Wait a minute. I'm making that up. There was no Last Night, but having his voice as Optimus Prime takes me back, and you know, of course, I'm also in the back in the day, I still am. I'm more of a Starscream fan, you know, and he was the same voice as Cobra Commander in the G.I. Joe cartoons, but. But Optimus Prime, there's just something about that voice that just takes you back.
Yeah, the ultimate leader, the ultimate superhero, like not even like a superhero, but he has a voice that is commanding enough to makes people want to move. Like the way he commands, like, you know, he's the leader of the Autobots, and it's like the leader of the children who follow the Autobots. You know what I mean? There is no other, and it's like, you know. I heard the story about how he patterned his voice kind of like a John Wayne, but off of his older brother, who fought in the military and just kind of had a very stoic and very matter of fact delivery. And for him in 2023 to still be putting that out there, even with an updated, like, Optimus Prime was a gangster. In the Bay films, like, yes, he didn't put up with anything. Like he'll blow your head off, you know.
That one scene where he took his sword and just goes like that. Yeah, I popped big time.
Just knowing that voice and being able to, it transcends generations.
Yes,
and it's that singular voice for me, and above all others.
Now, I will say this. I got to give props to Mark Hamill. I had no idea that he was the voice of the Joker for when the animated series came out. And then I later found out I was like, wait, Luke Skywalker is also the Joker? But it's like two totally different characters. But it was tremendous to figure that out. But to me, you know, we could talk about who played the best Joker, Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, whatever. And I do think from a live action standpoint, Heath Ledger was awesome. But to me, the Joker is Mark Hamill's portrayal in the animated series.
Wow. I can tell you right now, Will is a massive Batman buff. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he could talk to you for hours about Batman lore and the differences in the voices and the different series and what's favorite to him. And he'll tell you all about his collection. He's not ashamed to show it to you. And he'll tell you about the time he turned his Corvette into a Batmobile and it got stolen in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Wait,
while he was dressed as Batman.
Who would steal the Batmobile from Batman? That really takes some cojones right there.
Only keeping it Will, right?
It's got to be Joker. It's got to be the Joker or the Penguin or somebody. Now, I understand, speaking of voice acting, in addition to your music talents and artistic talents, that you're also quite the impressionist as well. I mean, there is, because, and it helps because all of the wrestling themes that I've listened to, and I've listened to pretty much all the ones that you've created, at least for AEW, it's amazing how you can sound like, you could change your voice to sound like all these different people. Like, 1 minute you're rapping about the Lucha Brothers, and then the next minute you're sounding, like Soundgarden, or you're Zach De La Rocha, getting me pumped up. Is that something that you've always done, impressions, or is that like maybe in Blockbuster would you do impressions to your coworkers?
No, I didn't really. I guess in passing I would do impressions and stuff like that. And I actually did impressions of my employees, and that I would always get a pop when I'm impersonating one of the employees or coworkers or something like that. I did that wherever I went. In terms of like singing and stuff, I played in a cover band, so it was just natural for me to mimic the voice of that particular person. There used to be a day where I could do Sebastian Bach. I can't do it anymore. But they had a they had a band. They called it the Build-A-Band in Richmond at one point. That's kind of how I met Will. So it was like almost like an American Idol type competition where the first song I sang in round one, it was a Breaking Benjamin song. The second song I sang was an Axl Rose song. The third one I sang was Skid Row, Youth Gone Wild. So, and then I ended up winning.
That's
being
awesome.
a part of his group. So, yeah, I mean, that's always kind of been just a thing of mine, just to kind of throw the hint in there. Whether it's with AEW, it's like Lil Jon or Zach De La Roca or Axl Rose with the Varsity Blondes, stuff like that, and keeps things fresh.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous. When do you think, and this might be an unfair question, but when are you have any plans on another album of your own music?
A solo album? We're in talks right now. I'm not sure if it'll happen in 2023 or 2024, but there's definitely one that we're eyeing to pencil in. So I'm looking at bringing some names in. So that's in the very prelim stages.
Got it. Well, Mikey, this has been phenomenal. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to have you back to talk more ADHD and maybe a little bit of wrestling. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of a fan. And definitely talk some more 80s. We could start talking about our favorite movies. I will probably see you soon on the Be Kind Rewind. I keep calling it podcast, but on Twitch, the Twitch stream, which is such a great hang. Everybody, please come hang it out. Go find on Twitch, Be Kind Rewind, BKRR
show. Yep. Be Kind of Rewind with Rukus, twitch.tv/BKRR show. You can find us on Twitter at BKRR show. And, we have some folks that are helping us pump out some nostalgia content every single day. So absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Any final thoughts or any final words of wisdom to our listeners and on mental health in general, or just any final thoughts you'd like to leave with them?
Yeah, I would say this, don't be discouraged. Every day is going to have new challenges. Every single day you're going to have victories and you're going to have losses. The thing you have to understand is that losses are not just losses. The L's are lessons. And you can learn something from losing, and you can apply it to move forward. Just take it one day at a time. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, but the point is you're working through it, and working through it sometimes means just stopping and doing nothing and just taking a break. Sometimes it means focusing on one thing. Sometimes it means making a list and plotting out how your day is going to go or your week is going to go. Sometimes it means setting goals, goal setting, even something simple with your to-do list. At the end of the day, if you can get, I always would list more than I can do in a day. That way I don't set a limit to myself. If I tell myself, okay, I'm going to do 5 things today, then I'll do 3 things. But if I list 15 things that I need to do today, I'll get 10 things done. You know what I mean? So those are the types of things that I've always come to know to really kind of move into my own, I guess you could say, forward progress. But just it's a daily thing, one day at a time.
One day at a time. Mikey Rukus, thank you so much. And I've been Mind Runner, a.k.a. Ron. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, man.
Catch new episodes of Mental Health Mondays every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Start your week off with a smile and some inspiration.